Love it or hate it, you know that we watched at the end of the day. It's time to talk about what happened today in the 2026 Monaco Grand Prix. A lot happened. We're going to cover as much of it as we can. And at the end of the day, it's going to be a lot of fun because whether you like it or not, Monaco is one of the more important rounds in the Formula One calendar. And so we're going to go over pretty much everything that happened. And realistically, not a lot happened, but at the same time, a lot happened. What's going on, guys? Welcome back. We are here to talk about what we saw this weekend in the streets of Monaco. It was a very memorable Monaco Grand Prix, if there is such a thing. We saw a lot of penalties. We saw a lot of changes of place for one reason or another, whether it be crashing out or penalties. It was mostly penalties. We're going to go over everything we saw. We're going to start with our weekend quick hits. We'll then transition to our weekend winners and losers. Then we'll hit the halfway mark when going over the predictions that we made before the weekend began. Spoiler alert, it did not go well. Then we'll take a look at our 3 lingering questions, and then finally we'll wrap it all up with what is next in Formula One. But without further ado, let's go ahead, jump on into this thing, and get it started with our weekend quick hits. Where else can you start than the star of the weekend? It actually is Kimi Antonelli, bringing home his 5th win in a row, matching Lewis Hamilton's record at Mercedes for most wins that he ever got in a row at 5, and Kimi Antonelli is showing no signs of letting up now. In a weekend where not many really pegged the Mercedes to be the fastest, especially when you were looking at the practice sessions. Ferrari was looking very strong, Lewis Hamilton was looking confident, Charles Leclerc, basically a Monaco master. But no, alas, it was Kimi Antonelli to take pole position, and Kimi Antonelli who walked away with a win in Monaco. What a weekend for him. He now extends his championship lead even further over not George Russell anymore, because Lewis Hamilton, by finishing second, actually overtakes George Russell in the Drivers' Championship. And so now I can't remember the exact number, but it's like 63, 64 points or something like that over P2, and Kimi Antonelli is building himself about as good a buffer in the championship as you can ask for. It was an unbelievable weekend for Kimi. Definitely deserved. He earned every single point that he got this weekend, and it really was incredible to see. As we move on, I think we have to go to the next thing, which is a combination of, in my notes, I wrote chaos, primarily centered around speeding in the pit lane. So many penalties this weekend, and it seems like speeding in the pits is the new fad, I guess. I don't know, Monaco is pretty known for its out there, billionaires and its new trends and whatnot. Apparently it now includes speeding in the pit lane, because I swear we saw more speeding in the pit lane penalties in this one race than I have seen in my going on, 5th year watching F1 combined. I swear to God, Pierre Gasly got 2. Everyone else had it, pretty much everybody else had at least 1. There were also multiple penalties for Sergio Perez lining up outside of his grid box on race starts or restarts. It was a penalty-filled Monaco Grand Prix, which is wild to say, because actually it ended up working in our favor, because it really shook up the grid. It really shook up the standings, and at the end of the day, we saw some of the wildest things we've ever seen. It robbed Pierre Gasly of a podium. It robbed George Russell of points, period. Him getting a drive-through penalty, although I would argue that's more on his team than George himself. It was insane, to say the least, and I'm very curious to see what F1 says about this, because there's a lot of rumors flying around since the race ended about the pit lane distance and how the speed in the pit lane is calculated and all that stuff. So we'll see what happens. But at the end of the day, we saw so much speeding in a sport all about speed. I've never seen more people get in trouble for going too fast. But speaking of mixing up the final grid, we have to give a special shout out to Isaac Hadjar, getting himself another podium under his belt. His first with Red Bull, his second overall, and it was a wonderful thing to see. He was fiery and fired up all race long. He was having some troubles with that Red Bull, and it really was a touch and go thing there for a little while, whether it would happen for him. Ultimately, even though Pierre Gasly finished P3 on the road, his aforementioned speeding in the pits penalties dropped him down, and Isaac Hadjar gets himself his first podium with Red Bull. I wanted to throw that one out there because it was a very well-deserved, even if it did come with the assistance of some penalties to a competitor, so it is what it is. Outside of that, I do want to wrap up our quick hit section because we're going to cover a lot more what happened this race and other areas. And so I just want to wrap it up by saying this, that we were so close to seeing Cadillac get their first point in Formula One. If Sergio Perez doesn't line up outside of his grid box on that final red flag restart, might I once again remind you, for the second time this race, he got pegged forward in the beginning and he got pegged forward on the red flag restart. Granted, his first one was because Bortoleto had to get pushed back into the garage and start from the pits, and Checo just didn't recognize it or whatever and just pulled up one spot too far. So that one was deserved. The second one, a little less so. He was lined up pretty well outside of his grid spot, and ultimately it cost Cadillac their first point in the sport. It was so much fun to see. For the brief amount of time that it stood, it was a lot of fun. Ultimately, it promoted Fernando Alonso into the points, so Aston Martin actually get off the mat before Cadillac at this point, which is a huge win for them. All right, let's go ahead and move on to talk about our weekend winners and losers. We'll begin with our weekend winner and an honorable mention. My weekend winner, I really went back and forth a lot on this, and ultimately I decided to go with Kimi Antonelli walking away as the weekend winner. There was obviously a lot of people up for choice here. Isaac Hadjar getting his podium, Lewis Hamilton overtaking George for second in the drivers. You have Fernando Alonso scoring his first point of the season. You have Sergio Perez almost scoring Cadillac's first point. That would have been more of like a second honorable mention. But there was a lot that happened this one. You had VCARB, incredible performance, getting a double points finish. Esteban Ocon going from P17 to P9. There's a lot of ways we could have gone here, but ultimately I'm going to go with Kimi Antonelli here to win Monaco on your second try at 19 years old. What a way to do it in style. Not only that, George Russell finishing outside the points. He now holds a 60-plus point lead in the World Drivers' Championship. Still very early. Obviously, we saw last year that the championship is far from guaranteed at any point in a season, but at the same time, to see this kid come out here and absolutely just dominate the sport like we all kind of assumed George Russell was going to do, it's incredibly impressive. Congratulations, Kimi Antonelli, on your Monaco win. Presumably at this point, the first of many, because my oh my, the performances he's putting in is one to remember. I do want to give a special honorable mention to, I did go with Fernando Alonso here. I think it is a very far-fetched idea if you had asked us just a few weeks ago if Aston Martin was going to score points at all this season, let alone in Monaco. Did it take the most chaos I've ever seen in a race? Potentially, yes. Is it still going to count? Absolutely. Fernando Alonso gets up off the mat, scores himself a point, and Aston Martin will not, at least for now, find themselves at the bottom of the constructors. So that's a win, even of itself. All right, let's move on now to, unfortunately, our weekend loser. And for this one, it feels pretty straightforward. I do believe it is Pierre Gasly, who got himself multiple speeding in the pit lane penalties to rob himself of his first Monaco podium. He finished P3 on the road, but unfortunately for him, and Alpine are going to do anything and everything from here on to try and get it reinstated. Got 2 5-second penalties for speeding in the pits, and it is going to be hotly contested in the French outfit over the course of the rest of this weekend and next week, I have to imagine. They can't linger on it too long, as obviously Spain is right around the corner, but at the same time, it is unfortunate that he was not able to take advantage of a brilliant drive that he put in to finish on the podium. Ultimately, if you can take any solace away from it, he did finish P3 on the road, but unfortunately, it was, like P7 or 8 when it was all said and done. So unfortunate to say the least. So I do think Pierre Gasly actually is our biggest loser here, because that is pretty tough to have your first podium ripped away from you like that. Because I think I saw that his team might not have even told him that he had those penalties. And so for a brief moment, he truly thought he finished on the podium, and then to have that ripped away from you like that, absolutely tough. I also want to give an honorable mention for a weekend loser, and that is going to be Sergio Perez / Cadillac because as I mentioned before, Sergio Perez was on the verge of just lining up in your grid spot correctly away from giving Cadillac their first points. Unfortunately, it was a penalty for him, and Fernando Alonso inherited that single point. So it's pretty straightforward, but Sergio Perez, you've been in the sport how long, and all you had to do was line up in your grid spot correctly, and you would have got yourself a point, and everyone would have loved you to the ends of the earth for it. But alas, it was not to be, so you are going to be my honorable mention, but Pierre Gasly, I think, steals the show this weekend, unfortunately. All right, let's move on now and quickly, and I do emphasize quickly, go over my predictions that I made before the weekend began, because it is going to be quick, because ultimately it did not go well for me. Let's begin with biggest positive surprise. I went with Oscar Piastri. I predicted Oscar to finish on the podium, and he did not. McLaren did not look on the pace this week. It was a bit tough to watch. Oscar ended up qualifying in the middle of the top 10 in qualifying, and then ultimately just kind of was existing for a good majority of this race, and ultimately just kind of finished, and it is what it is. It was a long weekend for Oscar and a long weekend for McLaren. So no points for me there, and it was an inauspicious start to the weekend, especially when we move forward and talk about my pick for biggest disappointment, which I went with Kimi Antonelli. Mainly banking on the fact that I did not think Mercedes was going to be as good this weekend as they ended up being. Obviously, he took pole position, he led every lap, and walked away with a Monaco win at 19 years old. So I was 0 for 2 so far. As we move on now to my qualifying top 3, I went with a George Russell pole, got the wrong Mercedes, a Charles Leclerc P2, got the wrong Ferrari in the top 3, and then Oscar Piastri, who was nowhere near the top 3. So far, out of 5 total points possible, I have rounded up exactly 0. As we're going to move on to my race podium, where I predicted a Ferrari win. I predicted Charles Leclerc to win, George Russell to finish second, and Oscar Piastri to finish third. Once again, over right there. So we are almost more impressively batting a 0 across the board. As we move on to my one crazy prediction, in which I predicted that a car would be lapped at least 4 times by the leaders on pace alone. And not only did that not happen, every car that finished on the lead lap. So multiple safety cars allowing lap cars to get laps back, and then a red flag to basically seal it from there. Did me no favors. Everyone who was basically laps down DNF'd, and everyone else finished on the lead lap. So my week went literally as bad as it could. I was almost going to say, like, it couldn't have gone worse, but literally it could not have gone worse. But unfortunately for the rest of my community, they ended up doing better than I did. So if we take a look at our points following the Monaco Grand Prix, we remain having a tie at the top. Both F1 Inferno and British TTG both tied on 21 points. Me bringing up a third place with 17.5 points. Spectral actually ends up taking the win this weekend, garnering 2.5 points for themselves, and so they are next up with 11.5 points, and then Sentinel 40 rounding us out with 5.5 points. It was a tough weekend for predictions. I think everyone at some point had one thing going well for them outside of me. Some of them were able to rebound much better than I did. But let's go ahead and move on now to talk about our lingering questions. All right, we leave Monaco with some questions remaining, a lot of which I think are pegged kind of looking at the Constructors' Championship as well as the Drivers' Championship. So both championships are where my questions lie, 2 of which are specifically about Mercedes and 1 of which is a little bit more broad. My first question as we leave Monaco is, can anyone catch Kimi? At this point, is, as I mentioned, still far from over, but that is starting to creep into my mind of, is Kimi Antonelli going to go full Max Verstappen and win almost every single race this year? At this point, he's won 5 on the bounce. He's taken pole and won like every race so far that he's won. It's an incredible run of form. Can anyone catch Kimi? That is a question I'm going to be asking myself as we now head to Spain. And I will be watching with fervent breath. And I think it's about time I start reflecting this new reality in my predictions, because I'm going to need to make up some ground. But there is our first lingering question. kind of tying in directly with our second of, can George recover his early season form? Obviously, George Russell started the season about as well as you can ask for. He ends up winning in Australia. He wins the sprint race in China. And unfortunately for him, that was where it really started to fall off. He has been good, but at the same time, he has not shown the dominance that Kimi Antonelli has, culminating this weekend in Monaco, where he finished outside the points and is now over almost 3 full race wins away from his own teammate in the Drivers' Championship. So it is going to be very interesting to see what happens from here if you're George Russell. And then finally, I want to move to the midfield, because my last lingering question is, will we see a midfield team really start to rise above the rest? I think Alpine have pretty consistently and solidly taken that best of the rest spot, if you're not counting Red Bull, because they're still in sort of an amorphous zone there towards the top of the field. And then Alpine, I think, is pretty solidly taken there, but I'm talking about the Williams, the Haas's, the RBs. I think those 3 teams are kind of really consistently fighting for that same next car up, and so I think we're really starting to separate F1 as sort of almost 3 full tiers. The top obviously being your Ferraris, Mercedes, McLarens, your Red Bull. The next tier, I almost would kind of just put Alpine kind of like by themselves. If we want to put Red Bull and Alpine in the same tier, I think I'd be okay with that. But then next, I think the top of the next tier is kind of still really up for grabs. Haas has really taken a step back from where they started the season. RB has had really high highs, but also really low lows. And then Williams started off slow, but has been slowly rising up the ranks. So I'm really curious. Spain is one of those tracks where you need to be good to perform very well there, and you need to be good at a little bit of everything. So this is going to be a big litmus test as we leave Monaco, a very unique circuit, to Spain, which is almost a very generic circuit. So I'm very curious to see what goes here and who can start to separate themselves in that midfield. All right, we have reached the pinnacle. It is what is next in Formula One. F1 heads to Spain in just a week. That's right, no more multi-week waits for the next weekend to come. We are officially gaining some momentum, and I am looking forward to it. Spain is going to absolutely rock, and I cannot wait to see what happens. Last year, we saw a Piastri, Norris, Leclerc podium. I do think we will be seeing a new podium as compared to last year. The only question left is, who will we see there? Be on the lookout in a few days for our predictions video for said race weekend. If you're interested in joining our community predictions championship, you can head to the link down below, join the Discord, and hop in and prove that you know wheel and hop in on the action. It is going to be an absolute banger. There's going to be so much talk this week about Kimi Antonelli, about George Russell, about Ferrari, about Alpine, about all of these pit lane speeding penalties. But regardless, it is only a handful of days away before we are right back in action again in Barcelona, Catalunya. It is going to be a banger. I cannot wait. And yeah, this weekend was an interesting one to say the least. Let me know down in the comment section below what rating you would give Monaco out of 10 this year. For me, I think it is a solid one, but not too bad. I think in terms of Monaco, this is up there. In terms of craziness, we obviously would probably go 8. Let's go with an 8 out of 10 for Monaco specifically. Don't shoot me. Let me know down in the comment section below. If you made it this far into the video, leave a like rating. It really helps me out. And as always, subscribe if you haven't already. We will be back in a couple of days for predictions for Spain. Be on the lookout for that. And yeah, that'll wrap it up from here, guys. And until then, I'll see you in the next one.